cleared out space on my phone so that there's hopefully enough space to record the video. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be doing a series, and so if you miss something and you want to catch up on it, it will be up on the YouTube channel, and I'll send out a link on Tuesday so that everyone's got that. A story is told of a Methodist minister, an Anglican vicar, and a Jewish rabbi who lived in the same town and became friends. And they would meet regularly to support each other, talk about ministry, have coffee together. And one day the conversation turned to giving. And specifically, your congregation, how does your congregation manage its giving to God's work? And so the Methodist minister said, oh, well, we've got a fairly good system. Once we've taken the offertory, I take it into my office after the service. I draw a circle on the floor, and then I stand there and I throw the money in the air. What lands in the circle goes to God, and what lands outside the circle we keep and we use. The Anglican vicar says, oh, funny you should mention that. We've got a similar system. I take the money and I go into the office, I draw a circle on the floor, and I stand and I throw the money up in the air. What lands in the circle, we keep. What lands outside the circle, God gets to keep. Anglicans are more holy than Methodists, apparently. The Jewish rabbi says, oh, funny you should say that. We've got a similar system. I take the offertory, I take it into my office after the service. I don't draw a circle. I throw the money in the air, and whatever God wants, God keeps. What lands on the floor, we use. Nothing like starting a series on giving with a bad money joke. There'll be a few more to come. The next 3 weeks, we are going to be talking about generosity, about giving, about our finances, about money. And it's a tricky business. Talking about money in the church is always a tricky business, and it's become such a tricky business that for many years, most churches haven't talked about it at all. I've discovered this wherever I've gone, and have resolved that I would make sure that, like we talk about worry and prayer and worship and all those other things, we would talk about money on a regular basis. Because in many ways, how you use your money really shows where your priorities are, right? It's a little bit like how you use your time and all the rest of it. So it is an important part of life. And yet the church is terrified of talking about it. And there's a few reasons for that. People tend to get a bit touchy when you start to touch their wallet, right? That's the first thing. You're bound to offend someone when you're talking about giving. And it's just a matter of fact. People don't like it. There are two responses that I've had consistently in preaching on giving. The one is, there will always be a person who comes after the service and says to me, that is the first time I've heard a sermon on giving in this church. And that reflects one of two things. Either the church has never talked about giving, or the person doesn't attend church very often. One or the other. But it happens. And I think a lot of it is because churches do not talk about it. We stay away from it. The other response that always happens is that someone will be offended and say, the church always wants money. Or the church is always talking about money. And that again reflects that that person never attends church, because obviously they just came to the only sermon where we talked about it. So these things happen. It's just a part of what it is. And I've grown and I've learned that actually, you know what? We still got to talk about it, even if people get offended. What I've learned in my own life is when I'm feeling offended, it's quite often a moment where I have to do some introspective work on myself. And when I start delving into myself and ask the question, so why am I feeling offended by this? I often discover that it's got nothing to do with the preacher or the church or the anything. It's got everything to do with my attitudes and God speaking to me. And so when I preach on giving, my prayer is always that if there is any person who takes offense, that you would be willing to do that hard work first before you make judgment calls on the church and on the preacher, because God might be speaking to you. So we're going to do this in 3 parts. Today is a basic introduction, and we're going to do a bit of a survey of money in the scriptures. Then we're going to look next week at Old Testament giving, and the following week we will look at New Testament giving. And at the end of that, you can then work through it all for yourself and decide, is my giving at this stage appropriate or not? So today starts with a bit of an introduction. And part of the introduction is a few disclaimer points, okay? And a few explainer points, okay? Normally, where I serve, we talk about money at least twice a year. I make it a part of my ritual as a preacher to preach on giving, on generosity, twice a year, and that's a part of the rotation. Which means that we talk giving when we don't really need to specifically need money, okay? It's always difficult to talk about giving when you actually need money. And so I'd like to talk about giving when we don't need money. However, we need money. And so I need to be straight up front with you there. We need money. If you track the giving and the expenditure of All Saints Anglican Church for the last 7 or so years, you will notice that we have not once in that time met our budgeted income for the year. Okay, we put a figure up at the AGM saying, this is what we need. In 7 years, we haven't met that target once. But then when we come to the AGM, we are always told that we balance the books. And so we feel okay about it. And that feeling is not a good feeling, friends, because it's missing a severe point or an important point. The reason the books balance is because your leaders do a good job of managing the expenditure, literally cutting the cloth to fit the material we have. But the budgeted income, the target was there because we have money that we'd like to spend on things. And as a result, what's happening, because we've got income that's down the whole time, we're not spending the money. And so stuff doesn't get done until it's a crisis. The vicarage is a good example. At the end of the day, we had to spend $25,000 to $30,000 last year fixing it up before we arrived. How long had it gone without serious maintenance? We just left it. Why? Because there wasn't money. You know, and I mean, maybe I'm going to cause offense here, but there was a family living there. You know, did we not think that they also needed nice carpets? You know, that's part of our witness, right? But the money wasn't there, so the leaders couldn't do anything about it. So our income does not cover what we need to minister. And I'll tell you straight out, as the leader of this community, I am constrained. There are things we would like to do and we can't do because the money's not there. So we need money. We're talking on giving and we need money. They're going to go together this time around, I'm afraid. Hopefully next time not. The second explainer or disclaimer, or whatever you'd like to call it, is that having assessed the giving in the congregation, I'm convinced that the money is available to meet the target. I'm pretty convinced that. I might be wrong. I might totally not understand what your budgets are and your expenditure is, but I think the money sits within this congregation, 127 of us, to actually meet the budget. I had Julia, I've forgotten now what Anglicans call it, recorder? Is that right? Methodist phrase for it is planned giving secretary. She's the only person who knows what each person gives because she gives you receipts at the end of the year, right? So I asked her to take everyone who gave in the last year and to categorize the amounts given over the year so that we could see what amounts are given. We have just under 80 people that give on planned giving to the congregation, so using envelopes or debit orders or whatever, right? Of those, 1/3 of those give less than $30 a month to the church, okay? So 1/3 of those givers, 26 of those givers give less than $30 a month, okay? I have done this exercise in 5 congregations now. I have never been in the top third of givers in the congregation, ever, until I came to All Saints. So I was pretty shocked when I saw that, when I saw the breakdown of statistics. I know what I gave, right? I'm not just in the top third here, I'm in the top 15%. Now, I mean, all that means is that vicars are totally overpaid, right? So, we need to assess it, friends. Part of the disclaimer is to say, I realize that most of our congregation is on a fixed income. I understand that. But I'm still convinced that we're not giving to God what is God's. That actually we've got more to contribute. And the truth is, if we're going to meet the budgeted income, we probably need across the board about a 50% increase. That's what it's looking at. Okay? So this is a serious moment. It's a moment for you to reflect, it's a moment for you to pray, and it's a moment for you to assess. Maybe the last bit of disclaimer or explainer here is, if the shoe fits, wear it. But if it doesn't, please don't. You hear what I'm saying? There are people in this congregation who are giving everything they can. Then this doesn't apply to you. You know, when Jesus goes and he stands at the temple and he sees that woman giving in what she's got to live off of, he praises her, but I'm sure he wasn't happy about it. And so if you are giving, genuinely giving what you can give, well, then that is it. And if that means that our budget, our income is really less than what it is, well, then that is what it is. Then we will make a plan. So if the shoe doesn't fit, please don't try and wear it. If it does fit, however, wear it. Gracefully wear it, if you can. And so we'll look at these 3 weeks. We'll have a look at it. And the question I'm asking you to really engage with is, okay, so with my own giving, am I giving to God what is God's? Am I giving generously to God what is God's? And I want you to look at it broader than just your money, because time and talents come into that, and I'll talk a little bit about that just now. But tithing is bigger than that. And it's where those of us who don't have finances can give and contribute in a way that's meaningful. Right. Okay, disclaimers and explainers over. Let's do a short survey of money in the Bible. When you look at conversation or discussion or teaching on money in the Bible, what you'll discover is that in the very early parts of the Bible, there's very, very little. The era of the patriarchs, Jacob, Joseph, all of them, there's very little about money, and there's certainly nothing about sort of teaching about money. And that makes sense, right? Because in that time, money played a very small part in people's lives. People still traded and bartered with each other for goods. So even in teaching on giving in the Old Testament at the beginning, it's really very little about money. When you brought your tithe, it was a tithe of your crop. It was a tithe of your livestock, okay? Because most people were farming. That's what they were doing. The early times, anything that's in the scriptures about money tends to be teaching on transactional law, okay? In fact, what we have in the law of Moses is the first ever Consumer Protection Act, if you like. The passage that Claire read for us, where a man sells his daughter into slavery, and if she gets returned, he has to return the money. That sounds like, it's a transaction, right? And I've got to get my money back. And the man's not allowed to sell her on to someone else, etc., etc. Now, just an aside on that passage. I hope that you feel inspired to read that passage again and to engage with your view on the Bible and what you see in that passage, where Moses' law not only condones slavery, but explains how to go about it, and not only condones polygamy, but tells you how to go about it in a way that, honors God. You've got to do 3 things for the first wife. Make sure she has her conjugal rights protected. Your version was very kind. Her marital conjugal rights. She has what? Somewhere to sleep and food or something. 3 things, right? You can have many wives. Just make sure that those things, okay? That's an aside. And if you want to engage with it, engage on it, I'd love to engage on it. But those are the things that you see in the first part of the Bible. The conversation is about, it's transactional law. It's about, I sell you this, you're unhappy with it, you return it to me, I give you money back, etc. Damaged goods, that kind of thing. There's nothing about worship. There's nothing about giving money to God. When talking of the tithe and so on, it's not about money. The first place you really see money cropping up in the conversation is, surprise, surprise, when the kings come along, from Saul onwards. So if you do just a word search on money in the Bible, you'll see that 1 Kings and 2 Kings is the place where money is talked about a lot. Why is that? Kings are rich. Come on. You've got a monarchy. What do you need to do? You've got to fund it, right? So you've got to tax. And that's what it's all about. And they were very creative in what they called their taxes, let me tell you. It was fairly sporadic at that time, not really a set system. But it comes in. People are taxed, you know, and you've got a gratitude tax for what God has given you. That's quite creative. So that's where it starts coming in. So, and what happens now is that society is developing, urbanization starts taking place, people are starting to live in bigger places, cities, you have more and more merchants, and so money begins to play a bigger role. You get the Assyrians come along, the Babylonians with their empires, those become more complicated, complex, taxes are more structured. And so money begins to play a bigger and bigger role. And so some of the later prophets start talking about tithe and money together, because now money is a bigger thing. By the time Jesus comes along, the temple has a box outside, and people drop their offering off at that box. Now, there were people still giving their cattle and their goats and all the rest of it as their offering. But many people by this stage had money. And so the box was outside. It wasn't a service. It wasn't part of the service. You could go any day of the week, and you dropped your giving in. And that's what Jesus is doing. He's sitting outside. He's watching. He's observing people giving. And this woman comes along. Okay. So money is now a central part of people's lives. And as a result, in the New Testament church, you get Paul teaching more and more about money, how we handle money. And I chose that passage, that famous passage, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Okay, that's where it gets to. Our sense as the church over the years on money is that it does play an important part in our giving to God. And there have been periods in church's life where it was just about money. Then we've had other periods where we've been terrified to talk about money. It's moved itself in the last probably 50 years to where people are quite happy to talk about tithing of your talents and your time, but not so much money. And I think you've got to look at all three together. God has given what God has given to us, and God asks us to return to God that which is God's in thanksgiving. It is our time, it is our talents, and it is our tithe. And so as you engage with that question, as you ask questions of yourself, look at it in those three categories. Because there are people sitting here who cannot give $1 more than what they give already, but might have a talent that we don't know about, or might have time that they could offer. And so in a community like ours, we're able to find balance. And that's what you need. Those who have money must give generously of their money. But often those who have money don't have time. And so they must give generously of their money so that someone else can give generously of their time, and it all balances itself out. And so I encourage you over these next 3 weeks to think prayerfully on it, where you feel itchy about it or concerned about it, to bring it to God in prayer. And if you need to discuss it further, I'm always open to talking about it. Let's see what God is saying to us about our talents, our time, our tithe. Let's be still for a moment in prayer.